right, we are on Chaf Aleph on the base 21b at the bottom of the page. So we're still in the middle of our discussion, defining the cunning wicked one. That is to say, someone who isn't just simply a Rasha, a wicked person, or wicked's a difficult word to use because wicked sounds like, I mean, the guy's malevolent. It just means the person's a sinner. I shouldn't say the word just either. It means he's a sinner. It doesn't necessarily mean the person's malevolent or evil, Knievel. But cunning wicked, cunning Rasha, means the person sins with cunning, messing someone else over, straddling the line of what's permissible, and pat himself on the back and say, well, I didn't do anything wrong, even though he messed over other people. We discussed examples of that over the last two classes. Now, I mentioned that today it's going to shift gears a little bit and give us a different kind of angle on the cunning Rasha, the cunning wicked one. And here, perhaps we could use the word wicked because there is a little bit of something bothersome about these people. Let's see. So second to last line, Rav Yosef Bar Chama. Chaf Aleph from the base 21b, the bottom, second to last line. Sorry? Yeah. So Rav Yosef is the words we're looking at. Introducing is the end of the last sentence, and Rab begins the new sentence. Rav Yosef Bar Chama, Rav Yosef son of Chama, Amar Rav Sheshes, taught in the name of Rav Sheshes. What's the definition of a Rasha Arum, the cunning wicked one, the cunning Rasha? This is one who, machriya literally means to compel. But it seems like he's a manipulator. He causes others to follow him. He says, look what kind of, look how pious I am. Look how amazing I am. Come follow me. I'll take you down a path. That's a path. He compels others in his path. That's literally the translation. And as Rashi explains, he outwardly demonstrates and exhibits pious behavior and making himself like a whole holy roller, as they call it. And that way he manipulates people to following him. But in reality, he doesn't have any internal value to back up his exterior behavior. This is the malevolent, this is the cunning wicked one. So this I think you can use the word wicked here. And there's real cunning here. It's a manipulation. The person when he lies at home in bed knows that he's a phony, knows he's a fraud, knows he's not as holy as he makes himself out to be, but walks around pretending to be holy, and everybody comes to shake his hand, and everybody comes to get his brachas, and everybody comes to listen to him, and he's dressed as all holy, but in reality, nothing to back up who he is. The expression in Rashi is, borrowing from the Gemara elsewhere, Ein toichai kabarei. His inside is not like his external. But he wants people to follow him. It's a master manipulator.
What you see is not what you get.
What you see is not what you get. Yeah, so I'm not going to say this guy's a cult leader. It's an extreme version of this. He's a manipulator of the masses, feigning to be that which he is not. Yeah. Yeah, I'm holding myself back from commenting any further because I don't want to indicate any cynicism. But I imagine if we close our eyes for a couple of minutes, we can imagine some people like this. I'm sorry?
Present company excluded.
Present company excluded, absolutely. Heard a story. I don't know if it's true or not true, but I heard this story. The point is a true point, and it could have happened even if it didn't happen. Rabbi Yoel Khan passed away, I think he was 91 or something, passed away last year. But we're still within the year since his passing. He's the chief scribe of the Rebbe's talks. He was a phenomenal memory, phenomenal genius. And he would sit for hours and listen to the Rebbe talk on Shabbos and Yom Tov, commit it all to memory, then transcribe it later. He would then write the Rebbe's talks up for the Rebbe to edit. So all the Rebbe's teaching that we have is all thanks to him. Because the Rebbe didn't write anything, at least not, wrote very little. The Rebbe spoke prolifically, and this man was responsible for publishing all the Rebbe's talks. Talking about a man's a genius. And not without exaggeration, directly or indirectly, every single Chabad person in the world, or anybody who's ever learned Chabad anything, learned from him. Even if they don't know his name. Even if you heard me teach Chassidus, one way or another, I'm repeating what he taught, either because I'm reading something that I wrote, which he transcribed, or because I listened to a class of his in which he explained something. We talk about a man of great stature. So he would be, and he also has a Hadras Panam. He's a very good-looking man. And he was older, he already was different, but he's a very good-looking man and spoke very, prolifically and very eloquently. He was a real chassid. He had a real aura about him, and he was very attractive to people. I mean, his farbrengens had hundreds of people crowded around for hours, literally for hours, and they're all recorded online. You can watch them. And also sang beautifully. Very charismatic person, but humble, in like the most humble man you can meet. He walked around 770. You wouldn't know. You could bump into him in the shoulder. Your shoulder bump into him in 770, and he wouldn't know that you hit him. He wouldn't know that he hit you, and he would move on. You would move on and wouldn't even know anything. It wasn't like a guy walking around with an entourage and all that stuff. Exactly the opposite of this kind of person that we're talking about here. So the story goes with him just painting a picture of who he is. So he would travel. He only spoke Yiddish and Hebrew, so his crowd was limited to Israel. He spoke a lot in Israel and the religious community. So he would go to Borough Park, Williamsburg, Muncie, and all these places and teach Chassidus, teach Torah, teach Chassidus, Farbrengen, talk, lectures, whatnot. So the story goes that at one point he was in one of these communities, and he's talking, and he can tell from the way they're treating him, they're starting to give him honor that would be honor to a Rebbe. In some circles where a Rebbe is not like there's a Rebbe every few blocks. It's not like one Rebbe for the whole world. There's Rebbes for different communities. So they start to treat him in that kind of manner, and he did not like that.
Where was this?
In one such community, from a religious community, Rabbi Yelkan's visiting a spirit of, I don't want to say where it is, visiting a religious community and speaking. And you can tell that they're treating him like they would, and he did not like that. None of that. Did not have it. So the story goes like this. He had attached to his beard got like tangled. He had this very like, not very pleasant looking attachment to his beard. It was like a web of like hair, not very pleasing. So usually he would tuck it away. He would tuck it into his jacket or whatever it was. So just to make the point that no one should treat him like he's a holy roller, he went to the car wherever he was, he took off his jacket, put it down in the car, took out that not good looking part of his beard, walked back into the building where he spoke and asked someone, "Where's the bathroom?" It's not something I never would do, right? But he just wanted to like exactly the opposite of this guy. He could have in a second made himself into, if he decided to give out brachas, people would be lining up. If he decided to. But he was not going to play that game. He was not going to do that. He taught Torah. He had his shlichus. He had his mission in life. He did it diligently. He was not shy. Didn't shy away from responsibility. He spoke publicly in front of thousands of people. People who were older than him, younger than him. It didn't matter. Because he was not going to cross the line of follow me. He wasn't going to do that. If he saw it happening, he cut it out. Anyways, I don't know if the story actually happened, but it could have happened. And it kind of makes the point. It's an extreme example, but the point is still made. About Yoel Khan.
He cut it out and he whipped it out.
Yeah, yes, I don't know. It's very possible the story never happened, but it could have happened. In other words, he's the kind of person that wouldn't allow, even though he could have very easily turned himself into.
Way of describing his character.
Yeah, exactly. There's probably some liberties in the story to describe his character, and that he, notwithstanding the fact that he could have very easily turned himself into a world leader that gives out blessings and has a private jet shuttling him around to visit his followers and wearing all the clothing and all. He could have easily turned himself into that, and did not. That's right. Later in his life, he's an 80-year-old venerable man who everybody in the world knows, and he walked around with the same mismatched suit and socks they did when he was a 30-year-old man walking around 770. No airs, no pretentiousness, zero. Did his job, did it diligently, and that's it. Exactly the opposite of this. Sorry? Yeah. Really, really humble man. His humility did not stop him from speaking proudly and openly and giving speeches that are top of they're on top of the world. But he's faithful to the mission. This is the mission. This is what I got to do. So I'm going to do it. That's right. I mean, even in his later years, he was an older man, and there's an organization called Talmud Sotah, which is basically like an organization of older students between their early 20s, and they're like a board that does events for yeshivas for younger students. So when people come to New York for different occasions, they'll host lectures or host events. They'll organize places for the students to stay in New York. They do that kind of thing, or they'll make an international competition between different yeshivas or different boys in yeshivas to learn a certain amount, and then they can get prizes. They do all that kind of stuff. They're not officially yeshiva curriculum, but they offer this kind of extracurricular. So this man is 80-something years old, and he would sit down with these guys, with these 25-year-olds, and ask them, okay, what do the Bachrim need? How can I help you? And they told him, you got to go here and talk here. He would go and talk there. Talking about people that were his students, not his students. They were students of his students who were students of his students. You know what I mean? But these guys are on the ground. They know what's needed. Okay, what do the 17-year-olds need to hear? What should I talk about? What do they need to hear? What are the questions they have? Where should I go? Literally, at that age, you'd be sitting with much humility on that level. So exactly the opposite of this guy, who does not have the character to back it up, does not have the piety to back it up, but walks around parading himself as if he's this holy roller and come follow me. Look, I'm going to give you blessings and I give you this and do that. Come follow me. That's the cunning, wicked one who uses piety to get honor and accolades and whatnot. So this is example number 1 of this class. It's example number 5, I think, in this whole category. But as I mentioned yesterday, there's a difference between the first examples that we gave with the last 2 classes, in which someone is using the law to get what he wants and mess somebody else over. Whereas here we're talking about innate character flaws. Right? This is item number 1 in that category of character flaws, where a person's feigning piety to get honor and accolades and fame. Yeah.
Is that what this word means?
Means in his ways. Machriya means compel. Achedim, others. Be'orchatav, in his ways. He manipulates others to follow his ways. When he doesn't have, as Rashi explains, he doesn't have the backing.
Right.
It's for his benefit.
Yeah, for praise, for honor, for glory, that kind of thing. No Taisvis here? Okay. Second to last line, last word. Rabbi Zvika said, Rav Huna, the name of Rav Huna. Similar kind of thing. We're talking about a character flaw that's difficult. This is someone who is lenient to himself, but stringent in others. And in reality, it should be the opposite.
Yeah.
When it comes to yourself, you take your own stringencies. When it comes to others, then you can see if you can provide leniencies. So this person isn't technically, he's not technically doing any sin. But it's a deep character flaw, where he finds loopholes for himself, but everybody else, he's strict.
That's like the exact opposite of what we just learned of Benjamin, of crying on the 2 necks.
Cried the other guy's shoulders, not on his own.
Yeah, exactly. For the other guy's problems, you empathize and you cry for him. For your own problems, you don't cry, you just
get things done, fix it.
And here's the exact opposite.
Yes, the verse from the Rebbe, Yosef cried on Benjamin's shoulder.
Yeah.
Rashi says because he cried over his Bais Midrash that was destroyed in his territory. Benjamin cried over Yosef that the Bais Midrash was destroyed in his territory. So the Rebbe asked, why couldn't they cry in their own temple? Why in the other guy's temple? So the Rebbe said, if your temple's destroyed, go fix it. Somebody else's temple's destroyed and you tried helping and you can't, empathize and cry. For your own, don't cry, go build it. Right? In other words, demand on others, but don't demand on yourself. I want to take this a step further because one could convince himself this is a good strategy. Why? A person might say, look, leniency on myself, I don't mind doing because I don't mind burning for it. I don't mind burning in hell. I don't mind getting the punishment for being lenient.
Right.
But I can't take it upon my shoulders that somebody else should be lenient. So I'll give him the more strict version. Someone can convince himself of that and say, look, I'm doing the right thing here because I'm being strict on the other guy because I don't want him to, God forbid, end up in a negative place. Okay, fine. Yeah. Says the Gemara, you missed the point. You missed the point. Be strict on yourself to the nth degree. But don't make it cost others. Don't make it cost others. There's a word from the Rebbe also about Yaakov. Yaakov married sisters. Now, Jewish law forbids the marrying of sisters. One cannot marry two sisters. It's the law, halacha. Even in the times when a person was able to marry more than one wife, two sisters, no. So how could Yaakov marry two sisters if Yaakov kept all of Torah before? Many explanations and many answers. And the Rebbe argues like this. Yaakov, before the giving of the Torah, was not obliged by the 613 commandments. That was a chumrah. It was a stringency. They took upon themselves to follow the mitzvahs of the 613, but they weren't obliged by the 613 because Torah wasn't given yet. What were they obliged by? By the 7 Noahide laws. And part of the 7 Noahide laws is, not directly, but indirectly, certainly if you promise something, like you promise to marry someone, you have to go through your promise. So part of the 7 Noahide laws is be a mensch. You promise to marry someone, marry them. So he promised to marry Rachel, but he ended up marrying Leah. So because of his own chumrah, because of his own stringency, he decided to follow the 613 commandments. Therefore, he's going to violate somebody else and not follow through with his promise to Rachel. So comes this great lesson. Your own chumrah. Yaakov took upon himself the stringency to follow all 613 commandments, but not at the expense of Rachel. You're suffering because she was expecting to marry you and living alone now. Because you promised to marry someone else, and now you're not going to marry her because you're being all stringent. So be stringent, but not on somebody else's cheshbon. So this is kind of this guy here. This cunning guy is lenient in the other guy, but I'm all holy. Look, he's strict on the other guy and lenient on himself. Right? And he's feigning holiness. I see. You should be strict.
He didn't promise to marry Leah.
But he did, right?
Well, he was tricked.
He was tricked. That's right. So he's tricked. But then he married Leah, so now he's with her. Now, technically speaking, he can't marry Rachel because that would be a sister.
Promise.
But because he promised, he did it anyway. So he fall through his promise, even though it meant foregoing his own stringency, because he was not going to take on his own stringency to ruin it for someone else.
We don't have to look far. We can look at our very own government, with all these laws.
We're not going to comment there. But the point is, don't be stringent on somebody else's cheshbon, on someone else's account, someone else's expense. He's got to be strict. For me, I'll be lenient. Don't do that. Don't do that. Okay.
They were twins, so it was hard to tell the difference of them.
Yeah. So the story we all know. I'm just making this specific. Okay, third to last word on the page. Ula Amar. Ula says, another example of this kind of character flaw, of the cunning evil, a serious, deep character flaw that's selfish in nature at the expense of others. You see, that's what we have here in both cases. The first guy is, he wants praise, and everybody else is following him at the expense of others. Same thing with the second guy. He's lenient for himself, strict on others. So it's a hypocrisy at the expense of others. That's right, hypocrisy at the expense of others. That's what it is. Ula says, top of the page, this is, now top of the next page, 22a. Shekara v'shana. This is one who, kara means reads, meaning he reads scripture. Shana means he learns, but specifically Mishnah, same root word. Mishnah is the root word from Shana. But like Shemish Tamid Chachamim, he did not serve the sages. What does serve the sages mean? Explains Rashi. He learns scripture. He knows scripture. He learns Mishnah, knows Mishnah. Now, Mishnah, by the way, even though Mishnah means like the Mishnah you have, the Mishnah just means Jewish law. Because Mishnah is the first work of Jewish law, but Mishnah doesn't have background, doesn't have explanations. That the Gemara has. But the Mishnah itself is just law. Right? Okay. So he learns scripture, learns Jewish law, but doesn't serve as scholars. Explains Rashi what a service scholar means. He didn't learn the background and the reasons behind the law. Now, what's missing if he doesn't learn the background and the reason behind the law? Right? The problem is that he won't know how to apply the law to cases that are not explicitly stated. Right? If you memorize the entire Code of Jewish Law, then you know the laws as they are written in the Code of Jewish Law. What if a scenario shows up that's not written in the Code of Jewish Law? You have to then apply the laws of the Code of Jewish Law to that scenario not written in the Jewish law. How can you do that? Unless you know the background reasons for those laws. If you know the background logic and reasons for those laws, then you can take that logic and apply it to the other. Right? This is what we're doing in Chuvas, right? On Thursday night when we learn the Chuvas, the responsa, that's what happens. They look at the texts and they say, okay, this is the reason for these texts, for these laws, and how do we apply it to the scenario that we're dealing with in the question, in whatever the question in that response is, right?
Oftentimes people, it reminded me, people think that they can like just Google the answers to a lot of questions, and it's not just knowing the laws, you got to know the whole background.
That's correct.
The reason so that you can be applied.
That's right. So explains actually what's the problem here? What's the big problem? Okay, so he's not proficient in the background of the law. He says, now the problem is this guy walks around, that's right, this guy walks around making as if he's proficient, and he can quote all the sources, and everybody's giving him praise because he's a great scholar, but in reality, it's very superficial knowledge. That's what Rashi explains it. He's superficial knowledge, and he's feigning great scholarship, when in reality, it's very superficial. And therefore, he should stay away from any halachic rulings. But the people listening to him think he's a great scholar because he's quoting here, quoting there, but he doesn't have the depth and background. That's right, yeah. Now I'm going to, sorry? Oh, yeah. So now I'm going to add something here. The language here, the Gemara says, to describe someone who hasn't learned the background of the law is Shimish Talmud Chachamim. Literally, Shimish Talmud Chacham means services the scholars. This is a language that comes up in the Gemara elsewhere. That it's, for example, the Gemara says famously, there's some value in servicing the scholar, literally servicing him, than learning from him. When you learn from them, you learn the abstract. And when you service them, you learn how they apply the law, because you see them eating, you see them drinking, you see them coming, going, right? You spend time with them on a regular basis, then you don't just see the law, you don't just hear their teaching, which is an abstract.
You'll see it in the Gemara too.
So for yeah,
say, I saw so
exactly
this way. So how could you say it?
That's right. You'll see it often in the Gemara. Well, I was sitting by a table and I observed him do this. Yeah. Now I'll give you an example of this. Right. So you could look. Let's say we're Chassidim of the Rebbe. So we learn from the Rebbe. So you learn ideas and their outlook on life and so on. But then there's something valuable when you read the My Stories printed in the Mosaic. It's not just this. The Rebbe is telling us a theory in abstract. You see how the Rebbe deals with an actual situation on the ground. How the Rebbe responded to someone, how the Rebbe was polite, how the Rebbe was. So it's not just you're learning about the theory, but you see it in practice, right? And this is the terminology used here to describe someone who knows the background of the law. That he services the scholar. That's the language that the Gemara uses. So why is the Gemara using the language of servicing the scholar to describe the background of the law? So I'll add another layer. This terminology, shimish, servicing the scholar, is also used for another thing, which is shimush. Also comes from the same term, servicing. Now, this shimush is the last stage if someone wants to become a rabbi. Someone wants to become a dayan, a paisik, someone who's a halachic decider. So first he has to learn all the laws. Then he's got to learn the background of the laws, be proficient in all that. And then the last step is shimush. Shimush means you sit next to the rabbi and you watch him answer questions. What do you gain there? It's a very similar thing. You don't just get the theory of the law, you get the practical. Because you see how the rabbi responds to people. And you gain much more than that, than just the information of how he answered. but also the empathy that the rabbi expresses when he answers the question. What's known as the 5th volume of Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch only has 4 volumes, but the expression is that a Rav has to have the 5th volume of Shulchan Aruch, which is a sensitivity and empathy, a little bit of, so classic story demonstrates the point. I don't know if the story ever happened. It could have happened. But the story goes, a woman calls a Rav and says, Rabbi, can one fulfill the obligation of drinking the 4 cups of wine at the Seder night with milk? So the rabbi says, fantastic question. And you think about it, I'm going to get back to you. The woman leaves. He calls in his aide and says, please pack up a box of meat, wine, matzah, and ship it to that house. What did he realize from the question? She's asking to drink milk. So first of all, she doesn't have wine because she's asking milk. But if she's asking for milk, and she doesn't have meat either, because you don't drink milk and meat together. So if he was a Rav who was busy with just the law, so he would start opening up the books and figure out what's the law, can she drink milk or not? But a Rav who got a little sensitivity and understands what people are going through, a woman's asking such a question, she's in dire situation. Call the guy in and send a box of food to the guy's house, to their house. Understand? So it's not about just technically understanding the law, but knowing, and not just even understand, in other words, perhaps when Rashi says that this person is lacking the background to the law, it doesn't just mean the background as in the reasonings for it. But Shimush, he's lacking the service. He's lacking the sensitivity. Doesn't know what it means to interact with people. Doesn't know what it means to and you can't answer a lot of questions, even if you know all the laws, if you don't have that sensitivity. And you don't understand how to, and that comes from Shimush Talmud Chachamim. This comes not just from learning from the scholars, but from being with them. And you watch how a rabbi answers a question with empathy, with insight, not just technically dry, here's the answer, yes, no.
Knowing what people need by virtue of the questions that they ask.
That's right, by understanding who they're at, who's asking, what's asking. I can mention his name because I think it's a praise of his. Rabbi Banon, locally, is a rabbi I consult with on a lot of things. So, and when I call him about questions that's in our community, so before he just answers yes or no, he'll often ask me for the background. Who are these people? What are they like? What's their situation? Financially, spiritually, emotionally, what's their situation like? And then the answer comes that way. Right? Now, if I open the book for the answer, I wouldn't get that sensitivity. It's only because Rabbi made himself available to me, and I can have these kind of conversations, and that I'm learning how to think about these things. And that perhaps is what the Shimush Talmud Chachamim here. Rashi translates Shimush Talmud Chachamim as he doesn't have the background knowledge, right? Which is true, but I think there's another layer which is tied into this idea, is when a person learns not just from the books, but learns it from servicing another scholar. And that's how he learns. He learns the human element of the law, not just the technical yes no, but understands the sensitivity, the background, the oral tradition of the law, not just the dry text.
Laws are not meant to be applied in a vacuum.
That's right. They're not applied in a vacuum. They're applied to people who are living, and you have to understand. That's right.
Could have made also a grave mistake. One wasn't sure for Shabbos, or she wasn't kosher.
Yeah, presumably this rabbi is in touch with the family. He knows who they are. He knows they're religious, and he knows they're not going to drink milk and meat. So if she's asking for milk, it means she doesn't have meat either for the Seder, right? She sends a box with meat, matzah, and if she doesn't have meat, she probably doesn't have matzah either. Because matzah is expensive, maybe minimal matzah. So, if someone's asking to use milk for the Seder, it means they're lacking a lot. So instead of answering the question, so forget the question and send her food. Much more important. Okay, so there we got 3 different versions of someone who is cunning evil. All of whom are people who are hypocritical. To the exterior, they're big scholars, guy walking around telling people to follow him, telling everybody else to be stringent because he's so holy, but in reality for himself, he's lenient. And this last guy who has all the information on paper, but lacks the background, lacks the reasoning, lacks the sensitivity, but he gets all the praise because, oh, look at him, he's a scholar.
First example is this guy Nada.
Yeah, that's just stealing.
Rich.
That's just straight stealing. Sorry?
Or how the mayor got COVID. This thing.
Yeah, We're not going to go. Okay. It's the C word. We don't say the C word at this table. My brother-in-law says we don't talk about CVT, COVID vaccination, and Trump.
Okay.
Three topics. We don't talk about CVT, COVID vaccination, and Trump. Three conversations that are off limits. We learn Torah. That tea we do talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody.
Yeah.